She was 8 years old. She missed her school bus one Saturday morning in April of 2004. And then she was gone. No witnesses, no physical evidence, no trail of any kind that investigators could follow. The community of Cedar Falls, Iowa searched for her. Law enforcement searched for her. Her mother never stopped searching for her. And for 11 years, nobody found her. Because for 11 years, nobody thought to look beneath the house she had never actually left. Her stepfather had built a hidden room under the cellar. A room with no windows, no address, and no existence in any official record. And he had kept her there, in the dark, under a single bulb on a timer he controlled, from the age of 8 until the age of 19. This is the story of Lily Anne Rourke. And this is Story Soft the Missing Jay. Before we go any further into this story, take a second right now and hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe to Story Soft the Missing Jay if you have not already. Every like, every comment, every new subscriber tells the platform that these stories matter, that these cases deserve to be seen, and that the people at the center of them deserve to be remembered. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to keeping this channel alive. Now, let's go back to Cedar Falls, Iowa. Let us go back to the spring of 2004, and let us try to understand how something this devastating could happen in a place that looked, from every angle anyone ever examined, exactly like safety. Cedar Falls, Iowa sits in Blackhawk County along the Cedar River, positioned adjacent to its larger neighbor Waterloo in a modest metropolitan corridor that serves as the economic and cultural anchor for a wide swath of northeastern Iowa. In 2004, Cedar Falls had a population of roughly 36,000 residents, a number that had remained relatively stable for the better part of 2 decades. The city's identity was shaped in significant part by the presence of the University of Northern Iowa, which occupied a substantial portion of its geography and lent the community a somewhat more cosmopolitan character than many Iowa towns of comparable size. There are coffee shops near the campus, and a modest arts community, and the kind of civic engagement that tends to cluster around university towns regardless of their size or regional setting. But the university was not all of Cedar Falls. Beyond the campus corridors and the commercial strips that served the student population, the residential neighborhoods of Cedar Falls retained the quiet, unhurried rhythm that had defined them for generations. These were neighborhoods of front porches and sidewalks and mature trees whose roots had long since begun their patient work of cracking and lifting the concrete beneath them. These were neighborhoods where people knew each other's names and noticed, in the way that longtime residents always notice when something was different. When a car they did not recognize parked on the street for too many consecutive days. When a house that had been occupied suddenly went dark. When a child who was usually outside, riding her bicycle in the afternoon, stopped appearing. Patricia Anne Rourke had been born and raised in Waterloo, the daughter of a factory worker and a school cafeteria employee who had provided a stable, if unremarkable, childhood for their 3 children. Patricia had graduated from Waterloo West High School in 1990 and had attended Hawkeye Community College for 2 semesters before leaving to take a clerical position at a trucking company. She had married young, at 21, to a man named Kevin Rourke, a relationship that produced 1 child, Lily, born in September of 1995, before dissolving in a divorce finalized in 2000. The marriage had been difficult. Kevin Rourke had struggled with alcohol dependence throughout their time together, and his drinking had gradually eroded Patricia's willingness to maintain the relationship. After the separation, Kevin relocated to Minnesota and maintained only sporadic contact with his daughter, sending birthday cards inconsistently and visiting 2 or 3 times per year before his contact dwindled to almost nothing by 2003. Patricia was granted full custody of Lily and received minimal child support. As a single mother with limited income, Patricia found the years following the divorce financially and emotionally challenging. She worked a series of part-time jobs, retail clerk, receptionist, data entry, while relying on her parents and a small network of friends for childcare assistance. She rented a series of increasingly modest apartments in Waterloo before finding the house on Maple Street, which she was able to rent at a favorable rate from a landlord who appreciated her reliability and conscientiousness as a tenant. Patricia was, by every account that emerged in the years after the case became public, a woman doing her genuine best under circumstances that were often difficult. She was not naive. She was not careless. She was a woman who had experienced the collapse of one relationship and who was, understandably and entirely reasonably, hoping that the next chapter of her life would be more stable than the one that had preceded it. Lily Anne Rourke, by all accounts available from teachers, neighbors, and family friends who knew her before her disappearance, was a bright and generally happy child who adapted well to the circumstances of her upbringing. She was small for her age, with light brown hair she typically wore in a ponytail, hazel eyes, and a gap-toothed smile that would later become the defining image of the search effort. The photograph that appeared on flyers and news broadcasts and missing persons databases in the weeks and months after she vanished. She enjoyed reading. She had a particular fondness for animals. Her second-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary described her as quiet but engaged, the kind of child who listened carefully and remembered everything. Her relationship with her mother was close and affectionate. Patricia attended parent-teacher conferences, helped with homework in the evenings, and maintained the kind of household routine that child development professionals consistently identify as essential for young children navigating the disruptions of parental divorce. Lily's world, in the spring of 2004, was small and orderly and safe, or so it appeared. She went to school. She came home. She read her books and played with whatever small animals the season permitted, and went to bed in her room upstairs under the steeply pitched roof of the house on Maple Street. She was 8 years old. She trusted the adults in her life to keep her safe. That trust, in the case of one of those adults, was catastrophically misplaced. Dale Raymond Hensley was born in 1966 in Independence, Iowa, a small city located approximately 30 miles northeast of Cedar Falls. He was the only child of Raymond Hensley, a grain elevator operator, and Dolores Hensley, a homemaker who supplemented the family income with occasional seamstress work. The family lived in a small house on the outskirts of Independence, and Dale's childhood, as reconstructed through interviews with distant relatives and former acquaintances conducted in the years after the case became public, appear to have been quiet, insular, and largely unremarkable on its surface. He was described by people who knew him during his school years as an exceptionally quiet child who displayed few close friendships and seemed to prefer solitary activities. He was mechanically inclined from a young age, spending hours in the family's garage disassembling and reassembling small engines, radios, and household appliances. His academic performance was average. His teachers at Independence High School, from which he graduated in 1984, generally recalled him as a student who caused no problems and attracted no attention. He was not involved in sports, clubs, or social activities of any kind. He attended school, completed his work, and went home. After high school, Dale enrolled in a vocational training program in industrial machining and subsequently secured a position at the John Deere manufacturing facility in Waterloo, where he would remain employed for the next 20 years. His work record at the plant was, by every account, exemplary. Supervisors described him as punctual, precise, and thorough. The kind of employee who arrived early, performed his assigned tasks with meticulous attention to detail, and departed at the end of his shift without fanfare or complaint. He was not known for socializing with co-workers outside of the plant, and his interactions on the factory floor were characterized by politeness and professional distance rather than warmth or camaraderie. He was the kind of man who could work alongside another person for years and leave that person with no strong impression of who he was beyond the basic facts of his attendance and his competence. Dale had never been married before meeting Patricia. He had no children of his own. He had lived alone in a series of rented apartments in the Waterloo and Cedar Falls area for most of his adult life. And his personal history contained no criminal record, no documented history of mental health treatment, and no incidents that had brought him to the attention of law enforcement or social services in any capacity. By every conventional measure available to the people who encountered him in the ordinary course of daily life, Dale Hensley was an unremarkable man living an unremarkable existence. That was, as investigators would later come to understand, precisely the point. The unremarkability was not incidental to who Dale Hensley was. It was in some fundamental and deeply unsettling way the most important thing about him. He and Patricia had met in the autumn of 2001, introduced through a mutual acquaintance at a community barbecue. Patricia, who had been single for more than a year following her divorce and who was carrying the full weight of raising Lily alone, found Dale's calm, steady demeanor appealing. He was polite, he was employed, he was seemingly stable, and in the context of what Patricia had lived through in her first marriage, those qualities felt not just attractive but foundational. Dale appeared attentive and genuinely interested in her life, asking questions about her work, her daughter, and her plans for the future. He was patient and unhurried in his courtship, a quality that Patricia interpreted as evidence of seriousness and maturity rather than, as it would later appear, the deliberate pacing of a man who had something specific in mind and was willing to wait as long as necessary to reach it. They dated for approximately a year before Dale proposed. The wedding took place in October of 2002, a small ceremony attended by family members and a few close friends. Dale moved into the house on Maple Street shortly afterward, bringing with him a modest collection of personal belongings and, significantly, the full complement of tools and equipment associated with his mechanical skills. Neighbors noticed little change in the household following his arrival. He maintained the lawn. He made minor repairs to the property. He interacted with neighbors in his characteristically polite but reserved fashion. He appeared to have a cordial enough relationship with Lily, who called him by his first name rather than any familial title. Patricia seemed happier and more relaxed than she had been during the period immediately following her divorce. The household at 417 Maple Street projected an image of quiet domestic stability that drew no scrutiny from anyone who had occasion to observe it. What none of those observers could have known, what none of them had any reason to suspect, was that Dale Hensley had begun a construction project beneath the house within months of moving into it. The modification of the coal cellar beneath 417 Maple Street began, based on forensic analysis conducted in the years following Lily's recovery, sometime in late 2002 or early 2003. Dale undertook the work during hours when Patricia was away from the house, at work, running errands, visiting her parents in Waterloo, and during the hours when Lily was at school. He worked methodically and incrementally, as he did everything, and he had planned the project carefully enough that its execution left almost no visible trace in the spaces of the house where Patricia and Lily spent their daily lives. The project was designed from the outset to be invisible, and it was. The original coal cellar measured approximately 8 feet by 10 feet, with a ceiling height of just under 6 feet. It was accessed through the heavy wooden door in the utility room at the rear of the house. Its floor was bare concrete, laid directly over compacted earth. Dale's modification involved excavating downward through that concrete floor and into the soil beneath it, creating a second and entirely separate cavity that would be concealed below the level of the original cellar space. The excavation was laborious. It was accomplished incrementally over the course of many months. Working with hand tools chosen specifically to minimize noise, a shovel, a pickaxe, a pry bar, and a series of heavy-duty buckets, Dale removed soil from beneath the cellar floor one layer at a time. He hauled the displaced earth out of the house in small quantities and disposed of it at various locations, including a construction way site on the outskirts of Waterloo, where the addition of loose soil to existing debris piles would attract no attention and prompt no questions. The concealed chamber that emerged from this excavation measured approximately 11 feet in length, 7 feet in width, and just over 6 feet in height. It was large enough for an adult to stand upright, though barely, and spacious enough to accommodate a small bed, a chemical toilet, and a limited amount of furniture and personal items. The walls were reinforced with plywood panels secured to a framework of 2x4 lumber that Dale had cut and assembled to prevent the surrounding earth from collapsing inward. The floor was covered with a layer of poured concrete, rough but functional, that provided a stable and relatively dry surface underfoot. It was not comfortable. It was not intended to be. It was intended to be sufficient. sufficient to sustain a life without ending it. And that distinction between barely sufficient and deliberately inhumane would define the conditions of Lily's captivity for the entire duration of her imprisonment. Ventilation was accomplished through a narrow PVC pipe approximately 3 inches in diameter that Dale routed horizontally through the soil from the chamber wall to an exit point beneath the back porch of the house. The pipe was fitted with a small electric fan at the chamber end to facilitate air circulation, and its exterior opening was disguised to resemble one of the drainage vents that were common features on older homes throughout the area. The pipe was positioned low to the ground, partially obscured by the lattice skirting that enclosed the space beneath the back porch, and its appearance was sufficiently mundane that it would not have drawn the attention of anyone walking past or even standing directly adjacent to the property. Lighting in the chamber was provided by a single overhead bulb connected to a timer that Dale controlled from the utility room above. The timer allowed him to regulate the chamber's cycle of light and darkness entirely independently of the natural cycle of day and night outside. That capacity to control when Lily experienced light, when she experienced darkness, and how long each cycle lasted, will become one of the most psychologically devastating instruments of her captivity. A way of untethering her from the external rhythms of the world above and replacing them with an artificial schedule dictated entirely by the man who had put her there. Access to the chamber was engineered with particular and deliberate care. Dale removed the original wooden door to the coal cellar and replaced it with a built-in shelving unit mounted on a concealed track system. The shelving unit was stocked with cleaning supplies, paint cans, and other ordinary household items that gave it the unambiguous appearance of a functional storage fixture. When shifted forward along its concealed track, a movement that required specific knowledge of the mechanism and could not be accomplished accidentally by anyone unfamiliar with its design, the unit revealed a narrow opening in the wall behind it. Beyond that opening, a short passage led to the top of a ladder that descended into the concealed chamber below. The engineering of the concealment was effective enough that the coal cellar itself, if inspected casually or even with moderate attention, would have appeared to contain nothing unusual. The shelving unit looked permanent. The wall behind it showed no visible seams or irregularities. The floor of the original cellar, where the excavation had begun, had been poured with fresh concrete that matched the surrounding surface closely enough to be indistinguishable to anyone without specific forensic training or equipment. Dale had, in essence, built a room that did not exist. A space with no address, no building permit, no registered dimensions, no visible entrance, and no indication from any exterior or interior vantage point that it occupied the earth beneath the house. It was a feat of concealment that reflected not only considerable mechanical skill, but a deeply premeditated understanding of how to exploit the invisible spaces within ordinary domestic architecture. How to build something in plain sight that no one would ever see. The chamber was completed based on forensic estimates developed after Lily's recovery by late 2003, approximately 6 months before Lily Anne Rourke disappeared. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who is truly following this story, because what comes next, the morning of April 3rd, 2004, is the part of this case that, even now, is almost impossible to sit with. The morning of Saturday, April 3rd, 2004, began in the Hensley household in what appeared to be an entirely ordinary fashion. Patricia rose early to prepare breakfast before leaving for a half-day shift at the retail store where she was currently employed. Lily was scheduled to attend a Saturday enrichment program at Lincoln Elementary, a voluntary academic session that ran on alternating weekends during the spring semester. The program used a dedicated school bus that followed a modified version of the regular weekday route, picking up enrolled students at their usual stops. Patricia later recalled that the morning had been unremarkable in every respect. She had prepared cereal and toast for Lily, reminded her to bring her backpack, and confirmed that the enrichment session would end at noon, at which point Lily would take the bus home. Dale, who typically did not work on Saturdays, was awake and moving through the house when Patricia left for her shift at approximately 7:45 in the morning. Patricia kissed Lily goodbye in the kitchen, reminded Dale that the bus would arrive at the curb at around 8:20, and drove to work. She did not look back. She had no reason to. What happened inside the house after Patricia's departure was reconstructed painstakingly and over an extended period of time through Lily's own account provided during counseling sessions with Dr. Cedar Falls over the course of the 18 months following her recovery. The reconstruction was difficult, not because Lily was unwilling to speak, but because the memories of that particular morning were fragmentary and disordered in ways that Dr. Merck attributed to the extreme psychological trauma associated with the events that followed. Certain things Lily remembered clearly. Others had been compressed or displaced or buried under the weight of everything that came after. The account that emerged from those sessions was not a clean narrative. It was a collection of sensory impressions, emotional states, and partial recollections that Dr. Merck and the investigative team worked together to assemble into something approaching a coherent sequence. According to Lily, Dale approached her in the kitchen shortly after Patricia left. He told her that the school had called. He said there was a problem. He said the principal wanted to speak with Patricia about something Lily had done, and that Lily should not board the bus that morning until the matter was resolved. The specifics of the alleged infraction were vague. Lily could not recall, even years later, exactly what Dale had said she was supposed to have done, but his tone was serious and authoritative enough to frighten her. She remembered feeling confused and anxious, unsure of what she had done wrong, and afraid of what might happen when her mother found out. She was 8 years old, and she had been told by an adult she lived with that she was in trouble. She did what children do in that situation. She became still. She became compliant. She waited to be told what to do next. Dale told Lily to come downstairs with him. He said he wanted to show her something while they waited for the situation to be sorted out. Lily followed him into the utility room at the back of the house. She did not remember clearly what happened in the minutes immediately after they entered that room. The memories of the transition from the familiar domestic world of the kitchen to the concealed space below the house were among the most fragmented and difficult to recover. What Lily did remember was descending the ladder. She remembered the change in air temperature as she moved below ground level, the way the warmth of the house gave way to something cooler and damper and altogether different. She remembered the sound of the shelving unit being moved back into position above her. She remembered looking up toward the opening and understanding in the way that children sometimes understand things before they have the language to articulate them, that something had changed, that the world above her, the kitchen, the morning, the bus that was due at the curb in a matter of minutes, had receded in some way that she could not fully comprehend but could absolutely feel. She was not going back up that ladder the same way she had come down. The bus arrived at the curb in front of 417 Maple Street at 8:22 that morning. It waited the standard interval. No child emerged from the house. The driver logged the absence and continued the route. When Patricia returned from her half-day shift shortly after noon, she found the house quiet and Lily gone. She assumed, at first, that there had been some miscommunication about the pickup time or the end of the enrichment session. She called the school. She called the parents of Lily's classmates. She drove the route between the house and Lincoln Elementary. By the early afternoon, with no trace of her daughter and no explanation that accounted for her absence, Patricia called the police. What followed was an investigation of substantial scope and intensity. Cedar Falls law enforcement, joined quickly by Black Hawk County Sheriff's deputies and eventually by state investigative resources, launched what would become one of the most extensive missing child searches in the region's recent history. Investigators followed hundreds of tips that poured in from community members who believed they had seen something, heard something, or remembered something that might be relevant. Search teams combed nearby neighborhoods and parks and rural areas in expanding concentric rings around the house on Maple Street. Dive teams searched portions of the Cedar River. Cadaver dogs were deployed in fields and wooded lots on the edges of the city. Investigators explored theories ranging from stranger abduction to accidental death to the possibility that Kevin Rohr, Lily's biological father in Minnesota, had taken his daughter without legal authorization. Dale Hensley was interviewed. He was interviewed multiple times in the weeks immediately following Lily's disappearance. He cooperated fully with investigators. He appeared, by every behavioral measure available to the detectives who spoke with him, to be a distraught and genuinely concerned stepfather. He answered questions. He gave consistent statements. He allowed investigators access to the house. The house on Maple Street was searched. The utility room was examined. Investigators entered the coal cellar, noted the shelving unit stocked with ordinary household items, measured the space, and moved on. The concealment held. The room that did not exist continued not to exist, even as investigators stood within feet of its entrance. Over the following months, as tips dried up and investigative leads narrowed, and the initial surge of media coverage gave way to other stories, the case went cold. Lily Anne Rourke remained a missing child. Her school photograph continued to appear on databases and occasionally on local news segments that revisited the case on its anniversary. Patricia Rohr Hensley continued to live in the house on Maple Street, continued to grieve, continued to hope in the diminishing way that the parents of missing children learn to hope when years have passed without answers. And Dale Hensley continued to descend, on a schedule he controlled entirely, into the concealed chamber beneath the house, continued to regulate the light and the darkness, continued to manage, with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else in his life, the conditions of a child's imprisonment. 11 years. It is worth pausing on that number. Not 11 days. Not 11 months. 11 years. Lily Anne Rourke was 8 years old when she descended that ladder. She was 19 years old when she finally emerged. The entirety of the developmental span that takes a child from early elementary school through adolescence and into the first years of adulthood. The years of friendships and milestones and discoveries, and the ordinary, irreplaceable accumulation of a life lived in the world, all of it was spent in a room 11 feet long, 7 feet wide, and just over 6 feet high. A room with no windows. A room with a single bulb on a timer. A room where the only human contact available to her was the man who had put her there. The psychological dimensions of what that experience does to a developing mind are difficult to overstate, and the full account of what Lily endured and how she survived and how the concealment ultimately collapsed belongs to a story that is still, in many of its most important respects, unfinished. What investigators were able to reconstruct in the years following Lily's recovery, through forensic analysis of the chamber, through Lily's own account as it gradually emerged in therapy, and through the evidence gathered in the course of Dale Hensley's prosecution, was a portrait of control so total and so deliberately maintained that it redefined, for many of the professionals who worked the case, what they understood captivity to mean. Dale had not simply imprisoned a child. He had constructed an entire system, physical, psychological, temporal, designed to make that child's continued existence in that room feel, over time, like the only existence available. He controlled what she ate. He controlled when she slept. He controlled what she knew about the world above her, and, more critically, what she did not know. The light cycle on the timer was varied deliberately and irregularly, destroying her capacity to orient herself in time. The information he provided about the outside world was selective and managed, a curated version of reality calibrated to sustain whatever narrative kept the situation stable. The case broke open not through a dramatic discovery or a sudden tip, but through the slow and accumulating pressure of Lily's own development. As she grew older, the narrative Dale had constructed to contain her became increasingly difficult to maintain. The questions she asked became harder to deflect. Her understanding of her own situation became clearer and more articulate. And eventually, in a sequence of events whose precise details remain partially sealed under protective orders in the Blackhawk County court records, the concealment failed. Lily was recovered. Dale Hensley was arrested. And Patricia Rohr Hensley, who had lived directly above her daughter for 11 years without knowing it, was confronted with a truth that no amount of grief counseling or investigative preparation could have made her fully ready to receive. The prosecution of Dale Hensley proceeded through the Blackhawk County court system over the course of the following years. He was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and related offenses. The forensic examination of the concealed chamber provided extensive physical evidence supporting the prosecution's case. The chamber itself, when investigators finally had access to it with the knowledge of what they were looking for, yielded evidence of occupation spanning years, materials, biological evidence, and the physical modifications to the space that documented, layer by layer, the long maintenance of a secret room beneath an ordinary house. Dale Hensley was ultimately convicted and sentenced. The specific terms of that sentence and the details of the conviction are part of the public record of Black Hawk County, Iowa. Lily Anne Rourke, who had been a child of 8 when she was taken from the world and a young woman of 19 when she was returned to it, began the long and profoundly difficult process of rebuilding a life. Dr. Cedar Falls, who worked with her through the initial recovery period and beyond, has spoken in general terms, while carefully respecting Lily's privacy, about the nature of that process. It was not linear. It was not predictable. It involved relearning things that most people acquire so gradually and so naturally that they never think of them as learned at all. The ordinary rhythms of day and night, the experience of being in open space, the fundamental and previously unimaginable freedom of choosing what to eat, when to sleep, and who to speak to. It also involved the more complex and perhaps never fully resolvable work of understanding what had been done to her and why, and of locating herself in a world that had continued moving for 11 years without her. Patricia Rourke Hensley faced her own version of that process. The knowledge that her daughter had been beneath her feet for 11 years, that she had slept above that room, cooked meals in a kitchen that sat directly over it, grieved in a house that held what she had been grieving for. That knowledge does not resolve. It does not become manageable through time or therapy or any of the conventional instruments of healing. It becomes something that a person carries, in whatever way they are able, for the rest of their life. The house at 417 Maple Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa, no longer stands as it did in the spring of 2004. The property passed through several hands in the years following the case. The modifications Dale Hensley had constructed beneath it were removed and documented as part of the investigative process. What remains at the address and in the record and in the community that has spent years attempting to understand what happened there is the question that cases like this always leave behind. Not how was it done, though that question matters and has been answered, but how is it possible? How does something this deliberate, this sustained, this devastating, take root and grow for 11 years inside an ordinary house on an ordinary street, while the world outside continues to go about its ordinary business? There is no answer to that question that feels adequate. There is only the story itself, the specific and irreducible facts of what happened to one child, in one room, in one city, over 11 years, and the ongoing obligation for those of us who follow these cases to make sure that story is heard. If this case stayed with you, if Lily's story is one you're going to carry with you beyond this video, do something before you go. Like this video right now. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this case. I read every single one, and your words matter to this community. And if you're not yet subscribed to Story Soft the Missing J, now is the time. There is another case coming that I promise you will not want to miss. A disappearance that has confounded investigators across multiple states for years, and that deserves every set of eyes we can put on it. Subscribe so you are there when it drops. These stories are why this channel exists. You watching, you engaging, you staying until the end, that is what keeps them alive. Thank you for being here. And for Lily, thank you for listening.